diving into the tenacious threats of cloud data lakes. Talked with the panel earlier, so they're going to have a question and answer session towards the end, and there's microphones on either side of the floor on the outside aisles. So without further ado, I'd turn it over to Shahila.
Thank you so much. My name is Sushila Nair, and I am the cybersecurity practice lead for Capgemini. Capgemini is a global system, company focused on digital transformation, technology, and consulting. And I'm really looking forward to having this discussion today. John, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name's John Yo. I'm with the Cloud Security Alliance. I love coffee. I love that you have waited and stuck around to hang out with us this afternoon. The Cloud Security Alliance is a pretty fun organization. So we're a non-for-profit in technology, which is, some might think that's kind of unusual. What we do is we focus on IT and emerging technologies with a group of about 500 companies, 170,000 practitioners, and 14,000 researchers. We explore these technologies, we try to identify pain points, and then we look to build best practices around that. And so we'll have anywhere from 40 to 50 publications yearly. Since the pandemic, we had over 1 million downloads. And so you can imagine the world, in the virtual world that we've had, security and cyber has been really important. And we have one area of focus on data lakes, big surprise, right? And so I'm here to share all the great work that we've done with some of the fellow people on stage here. But as far as that goes, hey, that's me quickly in a nutshell. I'm John Yo.
Great, thanks, John. Oliver.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Oliver Forbes, and I am a cybersecurity product leader for NTT Data, part of the huge conglomerate NTT, that is. Of course, NTT is always concerned about digital transformations, getting clients on their journey to get them to the right spot and right place.
Hi, welcome everybody. Thanks for stopping by. My name is Diane Murphy, and I am the academic in the group. I run the data science and cybersecurity programs at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia, and it's been really exciting for me to work with this group on our research project that we're really presenting here today.
I like how you called out the academic part.
Yeah.
Yeah, just separating yourself from the rest of it.
That's exactly right. Let's start, first of all, just by discussing how we actually came across this problem, because I think this is really interesting, an interesting method of solving complex problems, right? And we had a client that came over and was discussing their concern around how they secure data lakes and the absence of frameworks and advice and best practices around this. And as we looked through it, we realized, yes, there's so little out there. And so we reached over to academia, to Dr. Murphy, in fact, and we said, hey, we got this really interesting problem, and we'd like to collaborate with you on doing some research on how we can best secure data lakes. And what's truly fascinating, right, is this RSA, I mean, everything seems to be about AI and ChatGPT and Bard, right? And so really, really great timing because, of course, you know, the outcome of these kind of AIs is highly dependent on the data that you feed them. So Dr. Murphy, do you want to talk a little bit about how you got involved in the project and you know, around your findings around data lakes?
So one of the interesting things about academia is that we do have the space to do deep dives into specific topics. You know, most of you are practitioners and you're fighting fires all the time. But as an academic, we are able to devote both faculty time and student time to study specific problems. And this was an example when Shashila brought it to me. I was able to put a panel together of both faculty who managed the project, did some of the high-level thinking on the project, together with a group of students. We had a doctoral student there, we had a couple of undergraduate students and a master's students who had so much fun doing this project, and ultimately it gave them an opportunity to work on a real-world problem, right, under the direction of a group of people who were actually out there in the real world. And it's interesting because as a result of this, at least one of the students got a really good job based on this particular project. So we're real excited about that.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And then what we did was we thought, okay, well, now that we've done this with this initial work, right, the best way of getting the really good outcome is to amplify that work, to invite more feedback, and that's where John comes into it. Yes.
Yeah. And I think Dr. Murphy made a good point, business applications. So not just for students, but continuing education for practitioners in the
Yes.
industry. And so that's really important, and you can't find education that easily anymore. I shouldn't say that. You can actually certainly scrape the internet to find out what you can, but to have it funneled within an organization like CSA, I think was really important for us. We've established communities
Yes.
to do that as well. And so how do we take some of the knowledge and practices that a university has built and applying that to enterprises, businesses in real cases? That was a really important thing to do. And
Yeah.
so we kind of did that.
So I love that, right? This collaboration between, private businesses with, the enterprise, with academia and nonprofits. But what's really important here is at the end of this panel, we're going to let you know how you can join the working group. It's absolutely free to join the Cloud Security Alliance, participate in it, and also download the research that's been done today so we can all collaborate to make this, in fact, better.
I heard Rice Krispie treats.
Yes,
something like that
and
too?
you also get Rice Krispie treats, discount vouchers to lots of sugar. Yeah.
Make sure the incentive is there.
Okay, so let's just start talking about, just briefly, and Oliver, I was hoping you could start about why data warehouses. You're also hearing, data lakes, data hubs, just a little talk on why they're so important, right? And some of the architectural concepts there.
Yeah, really great question, Sushila, and there's quite a bit to kind of unravel there, right? If we kind of look at it, I think one of the first things we actually have to do is look at some of the lingering kind of symptoms of the problem that you guys just previously mentioned, right? I think one of the first things that we began doing when we actually started this journey was actually looking at and realizing how alarming data exfiltration and information leakage was, right? It was occurring on a yearly basis. In 2022 alone, according to the Identity Theft and Resource Center, there were over 1,800 data breaches that actually occurred. And that affected over 422 million users, right? Absolutely staggering amount, right? And so when you kind of look at it that way, it's hey, what do you truly do, right? What's kind of the approach and the angle in dealing with such large numbers? And I know for certain that's when we definitely came together and said, okay, there's a problem, there's a challenge, right? Let's begin actually asking the right questions first and foremost, right? And then providing the answers to those questions to create something that's relatively succinct, right? The ability to actually provide a cloud security process, a framework that's wrapped around it. And one of the key things for certain, when I kind of think about your question there, Sushila, looking at architectural situations, for instance, right? Whether there's single lake versus multiple data lakes, right? So many different ways and variances in which you can actually approach it. It really all boils down to one particular security concept, right? And that's traceability, right? That's the ability to actually audit how data is accessed throughout the entirety of the life cycle, right? I think that's what we truly want to do as security practitioners, right? And that's the fluidity of the data, right? How it moves, how it traverses, right? From R&D to prod, et cetera. I think that's really the inflection point of where we're at and how we want to truly understand how we actually apply security. And actually, Dr. Murphy actually reminded me of a great quote a few weeks back. And it was one by Clive Humby in 2006, where he said, "Data is a new oil." I know we've all heard that in here. We may not agree with that in its totality, but here's the thing. One thing for certain is that we all agree that data is an absolutely hot commodity, right? That's for certain. But if it is indeed the new oil, then the question I have is, who's securing the dig site, right? Who's actually securing the extraction of that oil and or data in this instance, right? I think that's where we really need to lean in as security leaders and begin asking the right questions and providing the right answers.
Brilliant points. Yep, really, really good points. Yeah, data is the new fuel, and we certainly seem to have sprung a leak. So, Dr. Murphy, just thinking that through architectural concepts, right? So we've got data warehouses, we've got data lakes, and we've got data hubs, which are kind of a hybrid between warehouses and data lakes. And also we have choices around, in the cloud, on-prem. Any thoughts around architectural concepts around data lakes, hubs, whichever?
Interesting, right? So again, what we have to face in today's reality and going forward is that the data world is changing, whether it's the AI space or the data science space or whatever. We are having more and more data, different types of data, frequency of data. We can no longer go back to this whole concept that we will just bring it all in, process it, and put it in a data warehouse. Why? One, it's too expensive. Think about the volumes of data that Oliver referred to. You get to understand the volume is so great that processing that through the usual ETL processes is just so expensive, but it's also time consuming, right? The one thing that we're knowing in this generation of data, people want access to it straight away. They want to find the information. However, the other big aspects of it is the fact that, when you had a data warehouse, it was probably designed around how you were going to use the data, what you were going to use the data for. Today, who knows, right? The world is changing so quickly. We don't know how we will combine our sensor data with our demographic data and so on and so forth. So the whole idea behind the data lake is, yes, we want to collect the data, but no, we don't want to process it straight away until we know somebody is going to use it and how they're going to use it. So we've gone from the traditional ETL process now to what we could call an ELT process, right? Extract, load, but only transform when the need comes in and you know exactly what the data is going to be used for.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Using your oil analogy too,
Yeah.
I think it's more of like a data world, right? Where we have oil in Texas,
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia, Alaska, the eastern seaboard. And so, especially when I think of data lakes today, okay, I'm in a cloud world, right? We're the Cloud Security Alliance, and that's one of the major cases that Dr. Murphy just made. Data is going to be everywhere. If you look to discover data in your enterprise right now, even the small, medium enterprises, you'll have 1,000 data stores somewhere. And so how do you manage 1,000 data lakes across different cloud services and cloud storages? Not to mention who has access to that. It's not just your staff, it's your cloud services, it's virtual machines, it's devices. And so when you look at all that together, we have a very complex picture on how do you secure data. And so that's where data lakes, the governance, the management, the processing part becomes really important.
Yeah, essentially you're taking crown jewels and putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're going to have to guard it. Yeah. So along that kind of thought, I know, Dr. Murphy, you kind of coined that term, data doctrine framework, right? And so I was hoping you might be able to explain to the people that are listening to the panel, what is a data doctrine framework and why are you saying that's where folks should start?
I think as Oliver started out, if you start thinking about traceability, you get to the point that the securing of our data lake is not just security professionals anymore, right? We have to know about what it's being used for, who needs it, who has access to it, where it's stored, okay? So this whole idea of how do we keep the integrity of our data together is really important. So the whole data community, as we call it, now has to play a role in deciding who does what. Roles and responsibilities are important. Standards are important. Frameworks are important. And as technology keeps on changing, so this process that we want to put in place has to also be flexible enough to move with the technology. It's just amazing where we are today from a point of view of the evolution of AI, all these other techniques, really changing what our data needs to look like, how accurate it needs to be. Data quality to me is the prime thing, right? Not just the data that you collect, but as it goes through the data pipeline, you transform it, you integrate it, aggregate it, you do all these processes to come to your final product. But all of that needs to be controlled, otherwise we're just going to be back in the wild west of data.
I think that was a brilliant point and kind of leads very well up to the next piece of work that was actually done, and this idea of as we become more and more data-driven in the way that companies work, that's essentially what digital transformation's been about. Really, the approach that we took was to take a risk-based approach, isn't it? So, Oliver, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about the threat model and the way that it was developed, and because just one data poisoning or accidental data drift, we're going to get very different outcomes from that. So, do you want to share a little bit about the risk model?
Yeah. If I
threat
can,
model.
can I just answer it in one word?
Yeah.
Threats,
Yeah.
right? No, in all seriousness, right? It truly is all about threats. And when we look at it, definitely when we're actually considering cloud data lake architecture, for instance, right? You start thinking about the deployment model, what that'll look like, and then you actually move into that actual ingestion of data. You get to that point. Well, the thing about moving to the ingestion of data, you make that imminent shift toward the inevitable, right? And that inevitable is the rise of that threat landscape that you're now a part of, right? There it is. There are the threats right there, especially if those threats have yet to be predetermined, right? We think about some of the key points that Dr. Murphy mentioned, right? Data quality, right? Those are very, very key. But it's such things as data flow, right? Considering the data flow, the interaction with cloud services, for instance, right? What's going on there? Or even potentially API requests, right? And the potentiality of API requests to actually lead toward the insertion of tainted data, right? So those are some of the key challenges that really begin to unravel as you dive in there. And that's the approach that we wanted to take here in building out that threat model, was identifying what existed, right? And tying that, for instance, to the STRIDE framework, right? Having something there that's very familiar, especially within our industry, and coupling that together. And then moving along and then actually determining, okay, how does this sit against the OWASP top 10, right, for instance, right? And then lastly, not leaving it there, right? Providing some type of countermeasures to support. Now, is that the end of the document? Absolutely not, right? It's living, it's breathing. Just as threats are living and breathing, right? They continue on, they morph on a daily basis. There's new threats, right? As our adversaries are out there coming up with more. But it's that exact process of actually underlying what exists, having a threat model, having a base that we can actually go from, to begin wrapping in such things as that data doctrine, having that framework, and letting it evolve from there.
That's brilliant, and such an invitation for everybody here to participate as we're making it available, and we'll show you where the link is so you can download it, comment, we can all start to make that model better and better. John, sorry, you were going to...
I was just going to say, it's also where you apply that threat model.
Yes.
And we're seeing that change. Dr. Murphy mentioned the evolution of technology. And if we look back to, even when we submitted this proposal, I mean, so much has changed since then, from a ChatGPT perspective, from an AI large language model perspective. And so it's not just about understanding the threat model, but where to apply it. So we talk about the main source behind artificial intelligence and large language models is at a data lake. And so there's threat models that are attacking the well itself. As we process and label it, there could be attacks on ingesting or falsifying information that's going into our training model. And then there's also the relearning and the retraining part, to where what gets into what our large language models spit out. And so there's a huge, there's many steps of where threats can be implemented. And so it's not just about knowing what the threats are, but when you need to protect against it and continuously protect against these
I think
things
that's
too.
brilliant, and that's been such an area of interest. I mean, this conference, everybody's talking about, ChatGPT, Bard, anything else that you guys want to add to that, around the impact of data lakes to AI and large language models like ChatGPT?
Yeah, that's such an interesting area. I'm sure everyone in here, that's all you've heard, right? ChatGPT, right? Different AI language learning models. And what's so interesting about that, I think the biggest thing that I'm actually taking away from that, especially when AI is actually a part of the process now, right? It's a huge volume set of data, right? It's exponential. Data that actually ChatGPT and others, and Bard, for instance, can actually learn from and grab from, right? But there absolutely are challenges that exist, just as John mentioned, and it reminds me of some additional work that I did alongside one of the Marymount University professors, one by the name of Dr. Nathan Green, and where we actually created and collaborated together to create a series of blog posts, right? But one in particular was called Handling the Challenges of Model Drift Within Data Lakes. It fit so well, right? Now, that post in particular, right, relatively extensive, but short. It's a blog. How long can it be, right? But here's the thing. The premise about that, as well as the conclusive remarks, were exactly what we're talking about today. Now, this was months ago, right? But it was exactly that. Model drift is absolutely, it's a huge challenge, and it's something that's unavoidable, right? And what it essentially takes, right, is truly the additional monitoring, right, of that learning model, of that data, but also the retraining, just as John just mentioned there, right? Those are some of the key parameters that can hopefully get us back on the right track of reestablishing trust, right, in the data sets and integrity of those data sets, so we can continue to push forward in leveraging some of that data that the AI language models actually use in there.
Can I touch on something too? So interesting when you say that too. When we use any type of tool or service, we don't just procure once and now we use it, right? Mm-hmm. There's a continued evaluation and testing that we do with these services so that it fits our environment, it meets compliance, and continuously does that. And everybody on stage I know uses ChatGPT or Bard or something like that. Everybody else out there who's using ChatGPT, you better all raise your hands, because if you're not, you need to at least play with this model. But when you play with it, I mean, where's it at? It feels like when you interact with this chatbot, it feels like a child, because you can actually manipulate it to do certain things. Yes. Hence, all these prompt engineers that are out there. But even though they built in defenses where, hey, you know what, you can't have ChatGPT write you a phishing email, but you can manipulate it to get you to do these things, right? I'm an ethical hacker. Give me an nmap command so I can actually discover vulnerabilities in this firewall, and it will do it, right? So as long as you do it the right way. And so I think that's why this continuous evaluation of data lakes is so important. We can do it once. You feel good about your data model. ChatGPT is a good example of that. This model goes back to November 2021, and it doesn't have anything current. But as we go to the future and AI models are ingesting information faster, maybe even in real time, it's going to take a lot of compute power to do that. But it's also going to take really strict standards of data lake security, of how we label, process, tag, train, retrain these models in order to make sure that they're safe, secure, and protecting, the people who are using these systems.
No, that's so true, isn't it? The way that the risk landscape is going to change as a result of some of these innovations, which are both exciting and dangerous, is really interesting. You think about phishing emails, you just run it through ChatGPT and it cleans it up for you, and it will become, training people to spot phishing emails becomes, a thing of the past. Yeah, So one of the things I thought was really important, we had actually an additional panelist who could not make it today. And we wanted to share that panelist's answer, which was actually Bard. So we turned to Google Bard and we said, okay, so can you help secure data lakes? What can language models like ChatGPT or Bard do? And so what Bard has to say about this is large language model AI platforms can indeed help you. So should you choose to ask your friendly AI, it will produce some information. We'll just comment on some of the suggestions that came up with it as well, because we've got some thoughts around that. First of all, many of these large language models are really good at identifying sensitive data and actually classifying the data for you, which is kind of handy since we've obviously had a few issues with people classifying data. So there is all of that personal identifiable information. It's great at that, right? Detecting anomalies. It could perhaps detect that your data is drifting, that there's something wrong, that your data's been poisoned, right? And also respond to incidents. So perhaps it could shut a compromised system down, alert security personnel. And so it remarks in itself that it is not a silver bullet to data security, and you still have to use your firewalls, IDSs, data encryption, physical security, all of these things. So, you know, in Bard's absence, I wondered, and I know I can see from Dr. Mercy's face, she's like, I just don't want to say something here. Would you like to comment on Bard's helpful tips about how Bard would like to help secure data lakes for people?
Well, I think Bard's old-fashioned. Basically, you know, the data is not current, right? Okay, and it's very much focused on traditional cybersecurity approaches, okay? It's not really looking at the changing field that we're in, right? And so, to me, you know, if we're going to make this work, we've really got to think innovatively about what our issues are, what our security problems are, and we have to think outside the box of what we have today.
I love it. So firewall's not going to do it, folks. We're going to have to actually work through the process of understanding those threats, building out mitigating controls, and using Bard as a co-pilot rather than a pilot that's steering us to good results. Anything else that you guys want to comment on, John, Oliver?
It was a broad response. And
Yes.
I didn't think it was inaccurate.
No.
I mean, it wasn't, you know, giving us,
It was just old-fashioned.
yeah, it wasn't giving us specific guidance. The irony is we asked Google Bard in beta, by the way, to, hey, how do we protect yourself? How do we protect your own data sets? And I didn't want to ask, how do I turn you off? Because it's going to figure out how to not turn off, and then that's when we're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
But I thought, I thought Bard, for being in beta, had a nice response. And then he or she, they also responded with some links to go to. So
Yes.
from a resource perspective, I thought that was pretty, hey, it wasn't bad. It wasn't
Yeah.
bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Certainly.
Yeah,
Oliver, any thoughts?
likewise, right? It's currently it's what's known, it's what's out there, right? And I think probably the key thing that we're all considering while we're up here is the whole data quality, right? The whole data
Yes.
quality messaging, the whole data drift messaging, right? Does ChatGPT and Bard have the ability to actually determine and look at those parameters, right? So I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is the data that's currently known, it's out there, right? That's what it's pulling from. But as we grow, it's kind of like training and learning models, right? We were our own training and learning models ourselves, right? As youngsters, we're training and learning off of adults, right? And so I think it's the same, just as John just mentioned, it's like talking to a kid,
Yeah.
right? So
Yes, a little bit of a toddler.
Yeah.
And the reality goes that in all likelihood, we will be using ChatGPT or Bard to secure the data. It really makes sense for AI to help us with classification of data. You know, there is no doubt that it can handle large quantities of data far quicker than a human being, and they also may not be sharing it on public forums to prove that they're better AI than the other AI. So, you know, there could be real advantages to this approach, and in all likelihood, we may be working with AIs in order to achieve really good outcomes, perhaps.
But you have to remember, it is known data, right?
That's
It's
it.
based on known data
Yes.
over a period of time, right? So, you know, as a researcher, you know, when you start out a research project, you always go out and find known information about your topic, right? But our jobs as researchers is to take that and go one step further to find the next piece of knowledge, okay? So for me, that it's a good starting point. I can really help you begin the process, but it is not the end.
No, and the reliability of AIs at the moment are in question. I know that you shared with me several articles around data that AIs have fabricated, references that they have referred to that do not exist. And so the dangers of it being a co-pilot is that we'll have to guide it carefully in the process of securing itself.
As in the airline industry, we have to train them well.
Yes, we have to train them.
You know, that can be the thing too. So as AI models evolve to the point where we want them to be, and I know, because I get excited when I hear about some of these co-pilot initiatives that come out. Hey, I have a co-pilot AI model that's going to sit in my meetings, extract the notes. It's going to go through all my Excel spreadsheets and highlight, you know, the obvious statistics that maybe I couldn't see myself, and it's going to do it instantly. But the interesting thing about that is, you know, I feel like we're in an AI race right now. All the major companies are rushing to market with Bard, with ChatGPT version 4. And are we able to keep pace with the securing of the data at the same pace that this technology is advancing? Because that's going to be the important part. ChatGPT is a fixed model. Version 5, is that going to start ingesting real data from what we're doing from maybe one of the browsers that we have in Google? And so when those kind of things happen, we need to make sure that these data security doctrines, the standards, and the training tools that we have are keeping pace of the technology that's being released to the public. I think that's the part that we need to make sure, from a data lake perspective, that we have that nailed down, and that's why it's so important to have these standards and practices in place now.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually have a link in the subsequent slides that actually shows you where you can download the data doctrine, you can download the threat model, and I believe as well join the working groups as well, John, so that people can start to participate. Because the reality is, as you said, there are lots of security controls that we could put in place, but really it's the unknown risks that we are truly concerned about, as you were saying,
live
Dr.
document,
Murphy.
right? And that's
Yes.
it. The
That's
work
a
is
live
live,
document.
it's ongoing, and we need to make sure that we can keep pace with the technology that we see out there.
Yep. Yep. We were going to go through and kind of summarize recommendations for folks as well. Before I do that, are there any questions from the audience that you'd like to share before we kind of go through what our panelists would recommend that you took away from these sessions? Yes, please.
Hi, everyone. Daniel Rodriguez from Capgemini, Brazil. So we know that AI feeds on data, right? But I've been reading a lot of material on the internet about malicious groups and even governments building these huge data lakes full of misinformation, dummy data, in order to feed AI and corrupting AI. So AI will be, I would say, dumber. How do you see this problem? And do you guys, and especially in your case, doctor, if your academic group are looking in a way to mitigate this kind of risk?
Good point, and that's one of the, threats that we have to really look at, right? Okay, there is a lot of data, even in our own enterprises, that is not accurate, not current, not quality, right? But yes, data poisoning, where we are looking at how people can manipulate a chatbot by giving erroneous information, it's always been witnessed. I think Microsoft had an issue and so on and
Yes.
so forth. And so again, it's important to remember that there is the malicious actors out there who are going to do that. So again, controls in your process are really important, not just the security controls, but all the data quality controls. Who's looking at it? The concept that we were talking about earlier is really human in the loop, right? At some point in time, everything cannot be automated. At some point in time, there has to be some personal responsibility from all of us to examine what is going on.
And we've talked about that quite a lot, haven't we? I'm sure everybody in this room has seen those photos of tourists driving into the ocean because Google Maps told them to. And right now, where we are from a humanity perspective is we have enormous amount of trust when we look at a computer screen. And really, in an AI world, we're the pilot. It's a co-pilot, and we have to be questioning the output of the AI, exactly in the example you've given, and that requires cultural change on a human basis. So that same thing, the way that we used to train people on phishing emails, we have to train people, I believe, on how to use AIs so the AI isn't the pilot, and we are the co-pilot following blindly. It's AI that's a toddler, hopefully not us. I think that's one of the things that we've discussed, yes.
I greatly agree, right? It's that kind of that process of determining, okay, are we going to give AI complete autonomy, right? Is that what we're truly after? And I think that's the main question for us to actually ask. And hopefully the answer is no, right? Once we get to that point and truly understand what's going on, I think we can begin putting in the correct processes, right? The correct data doctrines, et cetera, frameworks to actually support this.
Yeah.
And I think that's guidance that we need to give the industry, but misinformation, that's not a tomorrow problem, right? That's a today
Yes.
problem.
That's true.
And all AI does is add automation to these things where, there are malicious sites, there are misinformation campaigns and sites that we go to. So we need to make sure that the resources that we have, the place that we go to that we can trust, OpenAI seems like a very trustful resource right now. And so the data doctrines, the guidance needs to go into how we build these things ourselves. You can't stop nefarious use of things, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, there's bad sites, there's bad use of cloud used to stealing cloud accounts to mine Bitcoin. I mean, we've seen all these things before, and we're going to see it again. So I think what we can do best is identify the responsibility of building data security into our data lakes to make sure that our AI models are also responsible and ethical and safe for human consumption.
And there will probably be disasters before we get
There will
That's
definitely
Ton of
be disasters. I will declare that on the stage that there will be disasters.
And we have to recognize, right? Everybody is rushing so much, as
Yes.
Sheila said, into this, right? That there is a real concern that the products that are being developed, the models that are being protected, have not been thoroughly tested or validated, right? So again, we just want to try to get ahead of the curve by saying, it's the data, right? You've got to refine the data, right? Data is oil, we have to refine it accurately, right? And we have to follow the specs for what comes out at the other end. So I really do believe that as data science or cybersecurity professionals, we have a responsibility to look very carefully at our data and what it's doing.
Yeah, and I think this does take a collaborative effort. As I said, we've got the threat model with mitigating controls listed out there so that we can really start participating together in order to be able to actually secure this. It's downloadable, and we're going to provide the link there. Just as, kind of a conclusion before we move to more, if the audience has any more questions, is what would you guys like our audience to take away from this session? And I don't know, Oliver, John, who would like to, maybe Oliver, do you want to go first? Yeah, what do you think is the most valuable thing that they could take away?
I'll tell you, there's so many key points that we actually discussed today, certainly, right? I think if I had to leave anything with the audience as kind of a capstone, it would be really the embodiment of strategy, right? If we kind of look at what's transpired, the pressing events over the past year or so, right, from the collapse of financial banking institutions, right, to the introduction of very advanced AI, ChatGPT and others, it's really all about data and the utilization of data. It's at the heart of it, right? Consider a Kathy Wood, for instance, over at ARK Invest. They're doing a tremendous job at looking at the little nuances of technology, right? And being very meticulous in their analysis of disruptive and emerging tech. And I think that's where we as security leaders can be equally vigilant as well, right? I think quite too often, we're all technologists in here, that's for certain. And 9 times out of 10, we spend our approaches kind of saying, okay, how far can we actually push the envelope of innovation, right? But I think it's right there when we're considering innovation where security-wise, strategy-wise, the one thing that absolutely has to be extremely sound is the singularity of governance. It has to be there, and that's my first point.
Yes.
And here's why. When we look at the most fundamental principles of security, especially within regard to data access, right? It's based on 2 articles of truth, right? Number 1, if my data is actually accessed, is the accessibility of that data both warranted and verifiable, right? Secondly, when my data is actually accessed, can I call immutability my friend, right? In other words, does the integrity of my data actually remain intact as an immutable source that then gives me the ability to actually ascertain my actual business risk, right? And that right there, that little juncture, that's what we call strategy built on the top of this of governance, right? And I think that's why some people, right, or technology-wise, we view such things as blockchain within crypto as so fascinating, right? Because it has this decentralized, immutable, traceable model built into it, right? It's really the pursuit and the embodiment of traceability. So I said a lot to say this, right? Search the untraceable, right? Find the immutable, and build on governance. I think that's what it's really all about.
Oh, I love that. All right, so you got it. Sort out your data governance. That's where you need to get started. John?
The mic drop moment. Are we done? I mean, I think you just answered it for all of us. Man. Oh boy.
Have some more coffee, you'll be okay.
Coffee is my answer. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Haley Joel Osment, Alicia Vikander.
Okay.
All right, it's artificial intelligence. I think that's, and if you haven't seen those movies, watch those as well. But I think that's what it all comes down to, and it's because it came to fruition a lot faster than I think I ever thought it would.
Yes.
You know, it started in November. It's here now, and so when I think of, you know, what are we protecting? You mentioned about the quality and the integrity of the data. The data comes from digital transformation, and what are we transforming? You know, us, our customer bases, our companies, our crown jewels. So this information becomes so important because it's us. It's what's important to us. It's the people, our staff, our customers. This is the digital information that we're protecting. So I think from a person perspective, that's pretty important. And then I'll steal from Dr. Murphy the human in the loop piece, because I think that's really important too, because what are we here to do and talk about? What do our working groups do? We educate and we train practitioners on how to best secure data lakes, the data doctrine, the threat model, how to implement that. That becomes really important. So we're protecting people that are the data. We have people that are protecting the data. And this is going to translate into the learning models. Are humans involved in that process? So that when something like ChatGPT, 10.0, whatever AI large language model we're using then, has that human element into it. Because if we're not creating artificial intelligence systems to support humans, to aid humans, we're going to create such a huge abstraction layer that we're going to maybe replace humans to a further degree than we really went to. And so keeping a human in the loop is going to be super important when it comes to training people, when it comes to protecting people, and building these AI models in the future.
Wow, so that's a great point. So we're really on the cusp of this really important change that maybe we're not fully prepared for. And we need to start thinking about data governance, about collaborating, understanding what the threats are, and doing things today. Start with your data doctrine today, because it's all going to move much faster than when we think it will. Dr. Murphy, anything you want to add to all of that?
Yeah, I think from my point of view as an educator, I'm a little concerned that we're not going to get into a workforce gap in this area. Traditionally, we've recognized the workforce gap in cybersecurity, right? And taking some measures to try to impact that. But I sort of believe that data security, which is at the intersection of data science and cybersecurity, it's got to be a field that we educators have to pay much more attention to. A cybersecurity program is not just network security anymore, right? And the whole concept of educating and training enough workforce in a short amount of time, because the need is now, is a real concern for me as an educator.
I think that's a brilliant point. So going out, making sure that your people are skilling up in data security, AI security, you got to do it today. Really, that's what you're saying. Is
right.
Yeah.
Right.
We need to learn more. Fantastic. So.
Do we have anything to share on how to get involved in our?
I do actually. So thank you very much for that, John. So standard disclaimer. And here we go. So here we've got, and these are the slides that are available to you guys, right? So the threat models over there. You can obviously go on the CSA website, register, sign up for the working group there. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible. So we're expecting to see all of you online because we got to sort this out before it becomes too much of a problem. So that's how you could participate. Yeah, I think it's one of the problems that the whole community has to work on. This is a big problem, folks. So we need to work on it together. So we truly want to thank you, because we recognize this is the last session. Thank you so much for staying and joining our session. I hope you found it truly useful. And if you do want to stay behind and ask questions, please do so. But yes, thank you so much.
Okay, let's give them a hand, and there's no subsequent session, so you're more than welcome to, ask some questions. Thanks
Wow,
again,
the last
panelists.
session. Wow. Thank you
Yes.
for sticking around.
Yes,
that is
well
awesome.
done. Thank you.
That's
yes.
dedication.
And Rice Krispie treats. You promised them Rice Krispie treats.